So now we've learnt actually what we mean by fiat currency. And by the way, every currency in the world today is a fiat currency. So now we've worked that out, let's look at how commercial banks create additional money. And they do this through what's called a process of fractional reserving. Now, the best way to describe fractional reserving is by an example. But before we do that, let's just make sure we understand what we mean by money. So earlier we've been talking about the dollar, for example, and we understand that this is money. But this physical currency is becoming less and less of the currency which is in circulation in our societies. So if I put this in my current account, it's still money. And if I put it in my savings account or my deposit account, it's still money. But at some point, it no longer becomes money. Maybe it becomes an investment. So if I invest it in a share in Facebook, for example, then that's clearly not money. That's an investment. That's completely different. And so what we do is we often talk about cash and near cash or cash equivalents. And these are different definitions of money, and I've given you the two definitions here in the UK that I want to refer to. M0 is the actual physical notes and coins, but this is an increasingly smaller part of the economy. M4 is a much better way of describing the broader money supply, and that includes the deposit accounts and savings account and current accounts of individuals and financial institutions and companies, etc., etc. So here's the way fractional reserving works. Adam starts off with $1,000. So here we've got a nice simple economy, and we've just got $1,000. So 1,000 of these things, $1,000 in our economy, and they're owned by Adam. Adam takes his $1,000 and he deposits it at the bank. Now the bank has to put a fraction, hence the word fractional reserve. The bank has to put a fraction, and in our example, that's $100 on one side, and that's just in case that Adam wants to make a withdrawal, use an ATM machine, etc. Okay, so the bank puts some of the money on one side and then lends the other $900 to Ben, and Ben, with his $900, goes out into the world and he decides to buy whatever it is he wants to buy from Charlie, okay, for $900. So at the end of this first transaction, if we ask how much money is in the economy, Adam will say, I've got $1,000 on deposit at the bank, and here's my bank statement showing me. And Charlie will say, well, I've got $900 in cash, and here it is. And so in our economy, we've now got $1,900. We've created additional money in the economy effectively out of thin air. Charlie then takes his $900 and he deposits it at the bank. The bank puts $90 on one side, that's 10% of Charlie's money, and lends the $810 out to Dave, and Dave buys whatever it is he wants to buy from Ed for $810. So how much money in our economy now? Well, Adam's got $1,000 on deposit, Charlie has got $900 in his current account, and Edward has got $810 in cash. There's a total of $2,710 in our economy. And once again, Edward takes his $810, he deposits at the bank puts $81 on one side, lends the other $729 to Freddie, who buys whatever it is he wants to buy for $729 from George. How much money in the economy? Adam's got $1,000, Charlie's got $900, Ed's got $810, all on deposit in the bank. All of them have bank statements to prove that. And George has got $729 in cash. There's a total of $3,439 in our economy when we started with only $1,000. Okay, now, this gives the central bank, and therefore the government, a very important monetary tool. Because what the central bank could do is to say, well, rather than putting 10% on one side, we'd only want you to put 5% on one side. What effect does that have on the economy? Well, the answer is that it's inflationary. Now, let's look at why that works. Okay, so first of all, if the bank only has to put 10% on one side, then they can, in the first instance, they only have to put $50 on one side of Adam's deposit rather than $100, and therefore they can lend out $950, which means that it creates more money in the economy. Okay, So what effect does more money in the economy have? Well, in order to answer that question, we use a very simple formula. Here it is, and I apologize if you get nervous by formulae, but this is quite an easy one, and it really says that the quantity of money in the economy, that's the money supply, in our example M4, multiplied by the velocity of money, and the velocity of money means the speed at which it's moving around our economy. So if you think about your personal circumstances, you get paid on this day, you pay out your rent here, you buy some food here, you go to the cinema there, you put a little bit away, and then you get paid again, and then you rinse and repeat. So there's a sort of a rhythm to the way that we receive and spend money. It has a velocity that it passes through our wallet, and it's usually pretty constant. So the velocity of money is, generally speaking, a constant in our equation here. So the amount of money and the speed at which it moves around our economy is a function of the price times the quantity of goods and services. So let's imagine that you have a rich uncle in America and you didn't know about it, and just out of the blue your rich uncle phones you up and says, I'm going to gift you $1 million, and you're feeling pretty pleased with yourself at that. And you've decided to invest, and I use the word advisedly, in a Ferrari. So here's our $1 million Ferrari that we're going to buy. Okay, what effect would your purchase of that Ferrari have on the worldwide price of Ferraris? Well, before we get ahead of ourselves, we have to remember that if you go and buy a Ferrari in your local town, it doesn't mean that the price of Ferraris in New York, for example, is going to go up, because you can't move markets. But what if everybody received a check for $1 million from their rich uncle in America, and everybody decided to go out and buy Ferraris? Ferraris have two choices. One, they could increase production, that's the Q, in order to satisfy demand, or two, they could put the price up. Well, Ferrari have a limited amount of production, and actually part of the desirability of Ferraris is the fact that they don't make that many each year. So the Q in our example is constant, okay? And therefore, if we increase the M, the only thing that we can increase on the other side is the P. And therefore, what we see is increasing the money supply is inflationary and causes prices to rise. And conversely, decreasing the money supply, sucking money out of the economy, is deflationary. Okay, so what we now understand is the effect of the increase in the money supply by commercial banks. And if commercial banks, if they reduce the fraction they hold in reserve, it increases the money supply in the economy. And in theory, looking at our equation here, in theory, if you increase the money supply, it will have an inflationary effect on your economy.